While President Trump continued his feud with Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, tweeting about the Foreign Relations Chairman yesterday morning at the end of our show, he wrote, quote, "The failing New York Times set Liddle, L-I-D-D-L-E, Bob Corker up by recording his conversation, was made to sound a fool, and that's what I am dealing with." But the New York Times reporter then posted the audio of Corker saying his staff was recording the conversation and, quote, "I hope you are too." And White House correspondent Peter Baker writes, in labeling Corker Liddle, the president was evidently returning to a theme. He considered Corker for Secretary of State during the transition after last year's election, but was reported to have told associates that Mr. Corker, at 5'7", was too short to be the nation's top diplomat. Yesterday, the president and the White House brushed off Corker's comment to the Times that Trump's aggressive rhetoric could lead to World War III.
Mr. President, is Senator Corker right that you're putting the U.S. on the path to World War III?
We were on the wrong path before. All you have to do is take a look. If you look over the last 25 years, through numerous administrations, we were on a path to a very big problem, a problem like this world has never seen. We're on the right path right now, believe me.
Senator Corker is certainly entitled to his own opinion, but he's not entitled to his own facts. The fact is, this president has been an incredibly strong leader on foreign policy and national security, and he's been a leader on this front. And I think that's been seen and demonstrated time and time again since he took office.
Joe, there's this other weird narrative happening where Steve Bannon called for Bob Corker to resign. Of course, Corker's not in the cabinet. He's an elected United States senator. And yesterday, Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked whether or not Bob Corker should resign. Did she agree with Steve Bannon? She said, well, I'll leave that to the people of Tennessee, as if he should step aside for criticizing the president of the United States.
My God.
It is so bizarre. These people that occupy the White House, and Steve Bannon, who used to be the president's top strategist, actually would fit more comfortably and feel more comfortably working for a regime in Turkey or Russia. They believe in loyalty tests. They don't understand the separation of powers. They don't understand the Constitution of the United States, drafted by a man who, by the way, was 5'4", 5'5". They don't understand, actually, that Bob Corker is doing the honorable thing by actually doing his job. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders, how rich to say that Bob Corker's entitled to his opinion, but not entitled to his own facts, when the White House is, of course, under this president, the institution that lives in its own alternate reality and admits as much. And Harold Ford, speaking of alternate realities and speaking of being disconnected from reality, this president actually believes that he's going to get Bob Corker support on legislation, like, for instance, tax reform bills, while he's insulting him, thinking somehow that Bob Corker is going to give him the benefit of the doubt for a tax bill that Bob Corker has already said doesn't make sense and doesn't add up and would blow a hole in the deficit.
You know, you look at the vote totals on some of these important bills that have come through the Congress, and your point can't be amplified enough. They can't hold all of their group together, let alone stand to lose anymore. The only part of that story, Joe, the picture that really encouraged me was watching the president sit with Secretary Kissinger. The fact that the president's on his way to Asia at the beginning of November. There's probably not a bigger thinker and one with better relationships across the continent other than Secretary Kissinger. Hopefully the president listened, and hopefully his team is taking counsel from them. But back to the Senator Corker for a moment. The World War III comments, probably the most alarming and damaging things that Senator Corker said. You would wonder if indeed a majority of the Republicans in the Senate are of the same opinion that Senator Corker is, that this president is marching us down a dangerous path, that alone would give rise to conversation in the Senate and maybe the Congress about the fitness of the president for this office and whether or not he should continue serving in the office, especially on the brink or right on the heels of a trip to Asia. You would have to wonder, are they going to have some of this resolved with North Korea prior to the trip? Remember, in February, early February to mid-February, the Winter Olympics are taking place in South Korea. No responsible head of state can send a delegation or sanction a delegation traveling to South Korea if this dispute between us and North Korea festers or continues at the rate that it is. So I know we all hope that they find some resolution here. And again, I take only solace and encouragement from what we saw in the last few minutes, from the fact that Secretary Kissinger and he shook hands, and perhaps that means that some kind of progress and considerable progress is being made with North Korea.
Well, let us hope. Julie Pace, Bob Corker again. We have to underline this again. Several days ago, saying that Donald Trump's erratic actions, his erratic words, his erratic deeds could actually lead us down the path to World War III. I called foreign policy, top foreign policy advisors yesterday, and their impression was that we in the news media were missing the bigger story in talking about this back and forth. And they say we're much closer to a cataclysmic military event than even the media is reporting, that actually it's more dangerous and it's more serious that anybody's reporting, that Bob Corker actually is right. And Julie, did you get any pushback from Republicans on the Hill yesterday from what Bob Corker said? Because we still haven't heard anybody rebuke Bob Corker in the United States Senate publicly and say, no, what he's saying about the president leading us towards World War III is not correct.
Look, I don't think Bob Corker was talking in hyperbole. I think that he was raising a red flag that he takes very seriously and that he knows is shared by a lot of his fellow senators. But what's really notable, we reached out, my AP colleagues, we reached out to every Republican senator to ask, do you share Corker's concerns and do you think that the president is fit for office? We only got responses from a very small handful. There's pretty much silence and avoidance from other Republican office holders this week, even though we know and they know that this is the kind of conversation that happens behind the scenes. And it links back to Carol's reporting. It's about the uncertainty. It's about the question when the president throws out something in a meeting like, should we increase our nuclear capacity tenfold? Is he saying that seriously? Is that actually what he wants the Pentagon to be focusing on? Is that just a throwaway line from him? People frankly don't know. They don't know who in the administration speaks for the president on foreign policy when Tillerson or Mattis goes overseas and offers reassurances. Is that what foreign leaders should be holding on to, or is it the tweets and the pretty provocative lines from the president? So when you add that all together, yeah, a lot of people on the Hill and a lot of people among our allies in particular are quite nervous that the president could lead us perhaps accidentally into some type of military conflict.
Well, Mika, every Republican senator on Capitol Hill has the record before them. What we said on our show last August, what Willie was talking about from, I think, 1984, what Donald Trump said on Hardball during the heat of the campaign, where, again, he said, if we have these nuclear weapons, why can't we use them? Calling for a tenfold increase in nuclear weapons, having the most powerful Republican on Capitol Hill saying Donald Trump's erratic words and actions are leading us towards World War III, could lead us towards World War III. They are not pushing back to that reality. So my question is, at what point do they step forward as a delegation and do what Barry Goldwater did when he went over to the White House in 1974 and told Richard Nixon it was over? They don't have to go over and tell Donald Trump that it is over, but a delegation of Republicans need to go over to the White House and tell the president, either you assure us that the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the United States Senate is wrong, or we are going to take immediate action to limit your ability to launch nuclear weapons. And it won't be what General Hayden said last year. It will no longer be a system that is built more for speed than for rationality. These Republican senators in the middle of October 2017 have that responsibility for millions and millions of Americans and others across the globe. And if they can't do that, then there's something called the 25th Amendment that they're going to have to start looking at. This is not acceptable as the status quo. When you have the most powerful Republican on Capitol Hill saying the President of the United States could be leading us toward nuclear war, and Republican senators remain silent.
Let's pray for some courage, because they certainly have been warned very clearly. Still ahead on Morning Joe, more women speak out about Harvey Weinstein, including several who accused the producer of rape. And Hillary Clinton and the Obamas finally go on the record. What took so long? You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.